Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Corey and I am joined by Josh Lamb, DNSFilter's Director of Technical Operations, and Frank Ahan, IT Manager. Before we get started with the presentation on trusting vendors with your data, the importance of SOC 2 compliance, I do have a little housekeeping for you. You have a question box on the right side of your screen, so please feel free to use that to submit any questions that come up for you. If we can fit the answer in right then, we will. Otherwise, we'll answer all the questions at the end during our Q&A. Also, this presentation will be recorded and sent to you via email, so please be on the lookout for that later today. And we are going to be covering a few really cool things. First, Frank is going to cover how do data breaches happen via third-party vendors. And then Josh is going to go into a little bit more about the process of becoming SOC 2 compliant, what it means for an organization to pass the SOC 2 examination, and why utilizing SOC 2 compliant vendors should be a part of your cybersecurity strategy. So Frank, I am going to hand it off to you with our next slide.
Great, thank you, Corey. Welcome to the webinar, thank you. So how are third-party vendors' way of getting breached is a lot of industry experts estimate about 60% of data breaches actually happen through third-party vendors, and about 54 organizations do not have a full list of their third-party vendors and the access to what type of data that they have. These are both reports from IBM and Ponemon Institute, and that really goes to show of how important third-party vendors and their security is to us. If you can pass to the next slide, please. Data breaches, how do they happen through third-party vendors? Phishing and ransomware attacks, a lack of encryption either at rest or in transit, so you can get man-in-the-middle attacks. Improperly stored login information, surprisingly, that's really one of the bigger ways of that happening. And then access to systems that are not absolutely necessary for third-party vendors. I'd like to draw on an example of the Target hack. I think it's been, oh wow, almost about 8 years ago. The Target hack happened, and the way it happened was via a third-party vendor. And the third-party vendor was recognized as the Fazio Mechanical Corporation. They are a HVAC supplier, not only for Target, it found out they're for Walmart, for Walgreens, et cetera, but it looks like the hackers or the hackers were looking through, and they found out through by phishing Fazio, able to get into Target. How are they able to do that? First, they looked at Target's website on their vendors themselves. So they had a whole list of who were Target's vendors, and then they were able to phish one of Fazio Mechanical's employees and able to get credentials. Via those credentials, they're able to get it into the Target vendor portal, but also because being an HVAC company, they had access to the networks of local stores because they needed to check up on temperatures and set up alerts. And via that connection, the hackers are able to get into the network and eventually get into the POS system, the point of sale system. And the hack happened during the Christmas/holiday times, and they were able to steal about 14 million different credit cards and credentials and eventually put it on the dark web. So this just goes to show how important it is to really limit the amount of access that vendors have to your systems, but also making sure that your vendors are safe and secure and follow security protocols. If you can go to the next slide, please. So on average, it's taking around 280 days to discover a third-party data breach. I think for internal, I just listened to a security broadcast. It was about 60 for internal. It's gotten a lot better. Back in the day when Verizon first came out with theirs, it usually took 2 years. So at least internally it's getting better, but when you look at third-party vendors, it does take a longer time still. Next slide, please. So how would you safeguard your org, or you as a service provider yourself? How would you kind of sell yourself to your customers as saying that you are secure? One thing would be to have SOC 2 compliance, or to double check that that vendor has SOC 2 compliance. If they don't, another way is providing or having a security questionnaire with different security answers or questions that you'd like to ask the vendor, or things that you would want to provide to your customers. And something very kind of obvious is limit access to internal systems. Only allow vendors have access to systems that are absolutely necessary, and also enable MFA so that they don't have reach to other systems. So as a result of the Target hack, Target changed their security policy by improving the monitoring and logging of system activity. They installed whitelisting on their POS, point of sale system, improved their firewalls and policies, limited their vendor access to all networks, because again, HVAC, they had access to all the local HVAC, and through that, via the network, they could see everything else. And then they were able to reset or reduce privileges of over 445,000 target personal contract accounts. So they looked at their accounts and really limited, their security posture and making sure they only have access to what they need. So SOC 2 compliance is something that's very good to have as a company, or also when you're looking at vendors for SOC 2 compliance for those vendors to have. And then I'll hand it over to Josh to explain what SOC 2 is.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, appreciate that. So what is SOC 2? So as we go into it, it's systems and organizational control. So SOC 2 brings your security posture into the realm of being audited and verified by a third party. Now, it's obviously not the only certification to do that, but particularly in the world that we're in, software as a service, this is kind of the gold standard for ensuring that your systems and your security posture is audited by a third party and can be verified. So it's very easy for an organization to, say they're secure. What does that even mean? And so this provides a framework to operate within. And so you may even follow NIST or even CISA standards. Some of you that might be watching this webinar, that might be your starting point for end organizations that you support, as the CISA Cyber Essentials. But this really brings it to a new realm. It doesn't mean much to say that you're secure if nobody's really checking up on you and auditing how often you do things, are you consistent, and your security posture overall. So it's also a great framework for other certifications that are nearby. You think of ISO 27001 and others like that. So in short, it makes you verifiable and auditable. So it's a very good certification to pursue. Can we go to the next slide here? SOC 2 compliance, you're already there. Yep. So what goes into SOC 2 compliance? So there's 5 categories of trust services, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But typically it takes about 3 to 12 months to get SOC certified. It's a process of establishing a control set, which are the things that you follow on a daily, weekly, quarterly, monthly basis to ensure that you're following all of your policies and procedures as an organization. So let's go ahead to the next slide here, and we'll talk about all 5 of these. So security, confidentiality, privacy, availability, and processing integrity. Those are the 5 pillars of SOC. Now, these are considered tabs, so not everybody who has a SOC 2 report is going to have all 5 of these. Everybody is going to have security, and then beyond that, you can choose what tabs, for lack of a better term, to go after. Depending on what your organization does, right? The data that you hold for customers, how you process that data, and so on. So I'll give kind of a quick overview of each of these. Obviously, security controls are how well you prevent access to unauthorized data. So as you break into that layer, you're going to look at things like, MFA. Do you enforce MFA? Do you have a strong base of user identity where things are propagated? Do you use SSO? Are you able to cut off user access instantly if you needed to a certain application or to all applications? So how well do you protect your data? Is it stored? Is it secured at rest? Is it secured in transit? things like that. So as you break into this, there's really a lot that is involved. The second one is confidentiality controls. So how well is your data handled in transit and at rest? Privacy controls. Do you maintain PII sensitive data for your users, and what do you do with that? Does that propagate out to third-party systems? So then you have kind of a chain, right? You've got your data, customer data that might go out to get shared with another party, another data processor. How secure are they? Are they SOC 2 certified? What's their security posture? And so that's part of the privacy controls. Availability is interesting because at first glance it doesn't seem like it belongs in SOC, but it has a place here, which is how well is your system availability? You know, what is your uptime? Are you monitored for that? Do you have internal monitoring and controls to ensure that that is at a steady state? And then the last one is processing integrity. So if you perform data processing on behalf of people, is that accurate? Is that comprehensive? So an audit firm will work with an organization to establish a control set, which, you know, they evaluate their infrastructure, their platform, the service they provide to customers, audit their vendors, and then establish a control set of these are the things that that you need to be able to meet to be verified. All right, we can go in to the next slide here. So passing the SOC 2 examination. So first, you've got to have proof that this organization has a repeatable security process, that it's something that they have as an ongoing effort, and that they're able to provide proof that that's what they do. So for us at DNSFilter, for example, when we onboard a new employee or when we offboard employees, proving that we follow processes and procedures to do that in terms of cutting off access or granting access in the sense of onboarding. So proof that we have a repeatable security process, demonstration of best security practices. So a lot of the things I mentioned earlier, MFA and SSO, so forth, that they understand and implement these practices. So SOC 2, I mean, it's really comprehensive. There's user education on can you recognize phishing emails and everything like that. So as you really dig into this, it's very, very comprehensive. But what does it mean, all these bullet points here that you see on the slide, what does this mean for you if you're watching this webinar and you're looking at the vendor landscape out there, maybe you're purchasing a security product? Passing the SOC 2 examination means that they have all these things. They have a repeatable security process. They understand security practices. They secure customer data, which is your data. You want to know that that's being secure, that that's being stored appropriately. And then lastly, availability of systems as well. All right, then we can go to the next slide. Okay, so SOC 2 compliant vendors in your cybersecurity strategy. I want to spend a little bit on this slide to make this as practical and relevant as possible for those of you that are on this webinar and watching this. So you're in a position where you're evaluating vendors, you're maintaining your own list of vendors. How do you do that? How do you establish a program of doing that? You may have your own your own posture that you manage, and whether that's meeting SIG, meeting NIST standards, meeting CISA standards, however you do that internally in your own house is one thing. But when you approach relationships with vendors, really in 2022, and we're almost in 2023, it is very important that you are also aware of the rivers of where your data goes, where your customers' data goes. Because as Frank was saying earlier, there's over 60% of breaches, and it's still a very kind of sad statistic that it takes, I think we say on the slide, around 280 days. I mean, we're over half a year at this point that a third-party vendor could be able to clean up, what they're doing. So it's very incumbent on you to, be the manager of the data for your organization and to understand where that data is going. And the potential risk to your organization if that data were to be compromised. So the starting point, step one is, do you have a list of all of your vendors? We went over that stat earlier. Over half of organizations don't. So if someone asked you today on this webinar, can you provide to me a vendor list? And there might be half of the people on the call that couldn't, or maybe you have half of it, but maybe it's outdated by 6 months or a year. And if you don't have that list or it's outdated and you need to clean it up, the best place to start is actually going to your finance department. They're paying all the bills, and so start with the people you pay money to, and that's your starting point for the list of all of the people that you should be vetting in terms of the data that gets sent out. So if they don't have SOC 2, so you got this list of vendors, so you know who you have a relationship with. Step two is going through and doing even a lightweight data audit and saying, okay, what is our relationship as an organization to this vendor? What is the data that we share? You may be able to trim the list because there may be some vendors that you don't have any, you have a relationship with them where you pay them money, maybe they provide some sort of service, but from a data perspective, from a security perspective, the risk is, nil or minimal, because it's just not the nature of the relationship where you're, sending a lot of your own data or customer data. So then once you get the list of the people that you pass data to, they store PII, then what you want to do is ask for a SOC 2 certification. It's obviously great if you're in the evaluation process, their sales rep and everyone will be motivated to, help, arrange that, do security questionnaires, everything like that. And so I really recommend that you do that as soon as possible into, choosing a vendor. And as you're evaluating a few solutions in the marketplace, that is a big part of it, that you're evaluating their security posture. If they don't have SOC 2, not everybody has it. So if they don't, you want to get as detailed as possible so that you can make the best decision possible. It may be that that's a risk that you're willing to accept, right? Security in general is still a business of evaluating and assessing risks, because there may be a huge organizational need for a certain solution, but they're not SOC 2 certified. Maybe they're pursuing it, so that'd be one thing to start, is to see whether or not that is in process for them. The auditor can actually provide to that organization, they can pass it on to you as an interested party, a letter that they are undergoing SOC certification, and so that may help with your decision-making process, as well as just sending a security questionnaire and evaluating their security posture, so that you can see where they're at, and whether or not you want to accept the risk of having a relationship with them. All of these is not, what I'm saying about risk acceptance, it's better to know, right? It's better to know potential vendors and their relationship to your data. And so it's putting it all out on the table and seeing where they're at. And so then the next step after that would be to go through and make your vendor decision after that. There may be, in the result of going through this process, vendors that you have had a relationship with, but they're unable to really meet what you're looking for in 2022, where they have not improved their security. Maybe you've had a relationship with them for 5 years and they can't answer your questionnaire. They don't have the security posture that maybe you thought that they did. And so it's good to know that and be able to track that and be able to make decisions based on it. The last thing I want to say is that we have templates of this. We're trying to have as much practical value on this webinar as possible. And so if you don't have a vendor tracking template or a security questionnaire to evaluate vendors, we are happy to provide that to you. Go ahead and just get in touch with us. We'll show that on the last slide. And in Google Docs format, we have both of those. So if you want a vendor questionnaire, security questionnaire for vendor, or a vendor management list, that you can go ahead and just get in touch with us and we'll be happy to send those your way. All right, I think that's the last slide. So we'll open it up for any questions that you have for Frank and myself.
Thank you so much, Josh and Frank. So these are the email addresses to request either of those templates that Josh was just talking about. We do have some questions that came through, quite a few actually. So the first one that you just answered was asking for a sample of the security questionnaire. So thank you for preemptively answering that. Another question is, what if a vendor says that their security program is confidential information?
That's a good question. There may be situations where they, can't provide full detail to you, but there is usually a way, particularly if something like SOC, for example, there's letters that you can still get. I don't think it's acceptable in this day and age to really say, well, we can't say anything about our security posture. And so I would, pry a little bit deeper and say, what can you provide me that kind of goes over your security posture? Security questionnaire really helps with that, right? Can you answer these questions about what you do, your policies and practices as an organization? So not really saying anything is not, I would say that's not really an acceptable answer in this day and age. You're going to be sending your data to them. It's very important that you know how that's handled, because you won't really have full visibility of that. You're sharing that data, and this is your way of kind of assessing and evaluating how that data is going to be handled.
Awesome, thank you. Another question is, what is the typical cost of SOC 2 for an organization?
SOC 2 can vary. As a very kind of broad, just something to kind of throw out there as far as napkin math, I would say between around $40,000 to $80,000 when you consider the organizational cost of personnel being involved with it. A cost to the auditor is a big one. That's going to be kind of one or two, right? You're going to have personnel costs of people involved with it. It's going to depend a little bit on where your starting point is, right, too. If you've pursued other certifications in the past, you have a security program in place. And so it's just really mapping the controls and making sure that you're meeting those obligations. For example, ISO 27001 and SOC have about a 70% overlap in what's required for both of those. So if you have one, you're fairly close to getting the other one. So it sort of depends on where your organization starts from, but that's what I would say is kind of the broad math of that.
Awesome. How long does it take to go through the SOC 2 process? Then also, like, how is that maintained? Are there like additional audits?
Great question. Yeah, so it takes anywhere from 3 to 12 months. Again, it depends on where your organization's starting from. I would say most organizations can achieve it in 6 months. There's two types of SOC 2. There's a type 1 and a type 2 audit. So most organizations will start with a type 1, which is a point in time evaluation. So you just picture that as a camera, right? It's a picture. So you've got all of your control sets, everything that the organization needs to meet. And then you've got that picture. Okay, they meet it. And then type 2 is more like a video recording, right? They continue to meet it, every week, every month, every quarter. Typically, type 2 is going to be between 6 and 12 months for the audit period.
Are there any industries or types of vendors that wouldn't need to be SOC 2 compliant? So you ask them for a report and they say no, but you don't really have to worry about it?
There's industries it's more relevant for, I would say. So, DNSFilter is a SaaS company, software as a service company. So for us, SOC 2 is very much, a gold standard, and it's a big part of our industry. There are industries in which it's a little bit less relevant. I would say it more depends on what you do in terms of data. So I could see, a mining company might not really need SOC 2 as much. Now they obviously need to have a good security posture, and they need to, be able to kind of show that to people that they do business with. But that might look different than SOC 2 certification.
Makes sense. What about MSPs? Do you think that MSPs should be SOC 2 certified?
MSPs definitely would recommend, yeah.
Okay, awesome. As far as DNSFilter, somebody's asking, how do we monitor our availability?
We monitor it via a few different applications internally. So I would say you've got internal and external too. So we use status page. So if you go to status.dnsfilter.com, that shows all of our stats, our public stats. But then in terms of internal monitoring, alerting, we use a few different solutions. I think one of them is Datadog. Helps monitor for our team so that we're on top of issues before they become a public issue. So
Awesome. Do you recommend least privilege for vendors?
probably need more context on that question. I would jump to least privilege access, which might be where that question is coming from, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so. What protection should a document storage company like Ignite have in place?
Document storage company, I'm assuming you're going to have, that's your business. So obviously you're going to have customer documents, which is depending on what you might not even know, right? So you're probably going to have to assume that PII is going to be a part of that, right? If you're storing medical records or things like that. So yeah, I would definitely recommend SOC 2 for that. That definitely would cover a lot of what you're looking for, particularly around privacy and confidentiality.
Awesome. That looks like it was our last question. So I want to thank you again, Josh and Frank, for a really great presentation. We will be sending out the recording later today, and in that email, we will also go ahead and attach the templates. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to reply to those emails once you get them. Thanks everyone for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.